Welcome to Stetson Law Live, an interactive and informational event for prospective students of Stetson University College of Law. Your hosts today are Assistant Dean for Admissions and Student Financial Planning, Laura Zuppo, and Dean of Stetson Law, Christopher Petruskevich. Today's topic, a talk with the Dean. And now, here's Laura Zuppo and Dean Petruskevich.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. I know some of you are on your computers, iPads, and even your cell phones. We're excited to have you. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name again is Laura Zuppo, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Admissions and Student Financial Planning. I've been with Stetson actually 13 years as of April. I'm very excited to be here tonight. This is a fun event. We are happy to take your questions and engage in a really cool dialogue with everyone. With me also is our Dean and Professor of Law, Christopher M. Petruskevich. He is a tax professor and is going to tell you a little bit about his background.
Thanks, Laura. I'm delighted to be here with all of you and to talk a little bit about Stetson, but let me give you a little background about some of my interests and where I've been and how I've been practicing law before coming to Stetson. After graduating law school, I spent 10 years in Washington, D.C., first at the United States Department of Education and then representing the United States at the United States Department of Justice Tax Division, where I represented the United States in tax cases as well as bankruptcy cases. I taught as an adjunct professor at George Mason University Law School and spent 11 years at Louisiana State University, Paul M. Hebert Law Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The first 7 years as a professor and the last 4 years as Vice Chancellor for Business and Financial Affairs before joining Stetson about 18 months ago.
Wow. So in the last 18 months, I guess my question for you, Dean, is going to be, how would you describe the culture of Stetson? How would you describe the atmosphere and the vibe that Stetson has to offer?
It's such a small college feel. There's a feeling, I think, within our entire community that the way that Stetson operates with each other, in large part because we're in the Tampa Bay area, and our undergraduate campus is in DeLand, Florida, about 3 hours away. So the result is that we have a small college within a small college, and I think the result of that is that we have so much personal attention that's associated with our entire academic program. So it's not just about the classroom experience, but it's with the out-of-classroom experience, I think, that makes Stetson so unique. It's everything from the pro bono service that students tend to participate in, nearly 30,000 hours of pro bono service last year, and the fact that they do most of those with our faculty and staff as opposed to just students working by themselves.
I think you mentioned something, and I'd like to poll our audience. Can folks start typing in where you're from? I'd love to know if we have anyone from out of the state of Florida or even from other countries here with us tonight. And while you guys are logging in and telling us where you're from, I just wanted to ask the Dean a couple of other questions to start getting us going. When you go from practicing law to teaching law, there are probably some things that are different in the life of a lawyer, from being a practitioner to a teacher. What do you think are some of the most interesting things for you as a professor working with future law students that you would say are maybe something different from the practice of law? What's interesting and exciting for you?
Well, I think one of the ways that we tend to interact with our students is the way that we tend to interact in life and in the problems and in the complex situations that we tend to be involved in. Mm-hmm. And so in many cases, our students come to us with an idea that they may be interested in the practice of law, but making the link between what they want to do now and what they're thinking about doing in the future is something that I think helps build while you're ultimately in law school. So I think the interest that tends to exist in law school is one that students tend to come with an understanding that they want to be able to become lawyers. They want to be able to go to law school. But they're not quite sure the next step and how they want to get there. And so the interesting developments that I think tend to happen while you're in law school is one of interaction with a much broader community. There are so many other interests and activities that happen outside of the traditional classroom environment. A big part of that, I think, is our students interacting with the 26 or 27 different student organizations. And so there's something for everyone that I think exists on campus.
And our faculty talk about that a lot, that one of the things that draws them to teaching is the ability to interact with students, get to know them, mentor them. Stetson has a pretty powerful culture of mentorship, and I think it's something that's even growing. We have a couple of folks here that are logging in from Philadelphia, my hometown, Philly, and Texas, Greenville, South Carolina, Detroit, a couple of local folks, as well as Tallahassee. We are so happy that you're here and all logging into our virtual webinar with the Dean. So thanks everyone, and we'd like you to start typing questions. This is all for you. I'm going to ask the Dean lots of questions to help get this to be an interactive dialogue, but this is our way for you to interact with us. So start thinking about things you'd like to know, and we'll take your questions as they come up. Meanwhile, I'd like to have the Dean talk about a couple of our areas of expertise. Stetson's known for some pretty big areas. We're well ranked in a couple of those, and I'd love to see you share some of that information.
Certainly. So the first area that we're particularly interested in is our advocacy program. It's probably the program that Stetson is most known for, in large part because of the success in some of the competitions that we've had across the country. And when I'm talking about advocacy, I'm talking about trial advocacy, so those things that happen in trial in the courtroom, as well as moot court competitions and alternative dispute resolution competitions. U.S. News has been ranking advocacy programs for the last 17 years, and Stetson has been ranked first in the country 15 of those last 17 years. So something that we're extraordinarily proud of. I think it relates in large part to two main characteristics. One is that we're very successful in the competitions that we're a part of. And I think second, and probably as importantly, is the professionalism in which our students approach those competitions. So just to give you some statistics about some of the successes we've had over the last 15 or 16 years, Stetson participates in 20 or 30 competitions per year. And over the last 15 years, we have 4 international titles. We have 64 national titles, we have 60 regional titles, 44 state titles, 43 best briefs, as well as 100 best oralists. So we take very seriously our education in the advocacy area because, in my view, what lawyers do after they graduate from law school, after they begin their career, after they're midway through their career, after they're towards the end of their careers, they advocate on behalf of clients. And so our biggest strength is what the area of practices that our students participate in require. So that's one of the areas of influence, and I think the other prime example is our legal research and writing program. So U.S. News has talked about Stetson in the top 5 legal research and writing programs for every year since it's ranked those types of programs. And we're the only law school of the 204 law schools that exist in the United States that can claim that they're in the top 5 in both of those categories. And after all, when lawyers graduate from law school, they do 2 things on behalf of their clients. They advocate orally and they advocate in writing. And Stetson does extraordinarily well in both of those. In fact, one of the ways that we capitalize on our expertise in legal writing is the new institute that was created this year with Dr. Kirsten Davis as its founding director, and that's the Institute for the Advancement of Legal Communication. So combining that with our Center for Excellence in Advocacy gives us the strengths in those 2 areas that we think is ultimately very, very important.
We also have certificate programs in elder law, international law, and we have environmental law. And a lot of students ask me if it's necessary to get a concentration. And I think that it's okay not to seek a concentration. Do you have advice for students thinking about a concentration or not? They're up in the air. What would you say about a concentration?
I think the best way to come to law school is with the idea that you want to be able to practice law. You know, Justice Scalia used to talk about in speeches often that he wished he had taken bankruptcy class while he was in law school. And he uses that as an example of saying, well, you know, I wish I was a little bit more well-rounded while I was in law school. So I think it's a very good idea to come to law school with the notion that I want to be a tax lawyer. By the way, I am one, so there's a very good reason why you might want to think about doing that. But you also might want to think about being an environmental lawyer or a family law lawyer or a commercial transaction lawyer. But having that idea and opening yourself up to a broad, liberal-based understanding of what happens in law school, I think is the best way to approach law school. There are so many students in my 12 years of being a law professor that have come into my office and said, well, you know, everybody has told me that I ought to take at least one tax class. And I say, absolutely right, I think you ought to take one tax class. And many of them are philosophy majors, many of them are history majors, many of them are political science majors, and they say, I don't understand anything about numbers. And my response is, take one class, no matter what you do, there's going to be an impact of tax on a little bit of everything. And it's so interesting how many of those ultimately became tax lawyers. And it's also as interesting how many of those that had finance degrees and accounting degrees came into my office and said, when can I take my first tax class? I would love to be able to do that. And they take the first tax class, I'm hoping not with me, and decide that they don't want to be a tax lawyer. And as a result, they decide they want to be a family lawyer, or they want to do bankruptcy law, or they want to do some other area of interest. And so I think coming to law school with the idea that you might have a pathway that you might want to get to the result, but yet thinking more broadly about coming with an open mind and thinking that there might be something else.
That's great. Well, we're starting to get some great questions from everyone out there, and I'd like to actually take DF Austin's question about how realistic are the advocacy programs compared to real trial courts. And I think what I'd like to do is actually segue into a little video we've prepared for you guys. If you'll bear with us, we have a video on what is advocacy, and DF Austin, I think that will answer your question. Stan, can you roll with that for us, or do you need a minute or two? He's ready.
The person who makes a good advocate is the person who does the work to learn the law. Advocacy is the application of the law in furtherance of a goal of a human being. It's making a difference in other people's lives, and we do that. We teach that from the moment you come in the door until long after you've left. As long as you're a member of the Stetson alumni, you're part of our advocacy family.
Being an advocate really merely means coming alongside someone to help them accomplish something they couldn't have accomplished without you.
I think people don't understand what trial advocacy truly means. And what it means is how you try a case in court. There's a huge difference between a trial advocate and a general advocate or a general attorney. And just like in medicine, not every doctor is a surgeon.
You can have a really excellent case with all the law on your side, but if you advocate poorly, you put it across in a very poor manner, you're still going to lose because the substance of your case is just lost. Similarly, you can make a weak case into a very strong one by taking a couple of useful points of law and just making the absolute best out of them.
I'm a private criminal defense attorney. My clients have the absolute constitutional right to a trial in front of their peers, and that's what I'm there to do as an advocate.
We've all argued in our life. Think back to the first argument you had with your parents. Can I have the car keys? No. Well, you stood there and you advocated.
They've had an opportunity to stand in a courtroom very similar to the way it is in real life and make arguments and respond to objections and so forth exactly the way it happens in real life, so that when they're in a real life environment, they're totally comfortable with themselves when they're standing in the well of the court.
So let me tell you a little bit about my experiences both at the United States Department of Justice as well as observing some of our trial teams in action. The first time that I ever stood up in court was when I represented the United States, and it's really a little bit intimidating to stand up for the first time and say, Chris Petroskevich, Department of Justice for the United States. It's much better to be able to think about it in the context of a moot court trial or moot court practice. The only thing that our students do differently than I did when I was trying cases on behalf of the government is do voir dire, which is question potential jurors. That's the only part that is different. There's everything from opening statements to pretrial motions. There is the examination of witnesses and cross-examining of witnesses. There is mid-trial motions. There is post-trial motions. And of course, at the end, you have someone that is selected the winner. In real life, you have a client that's sitting next to you that's either really happy or very unhappy as a result. But the competitions are set up exactly like it appears in real court.
Great. So we have a question from Law Tony, and Law Tony wants to know if there are scholarship opportunities for students who participate in moot court or mock trial. And actually, yes, Tony, we have some application-based scholarships for students who have participated in our competition team programs. We're going to just jump into some of these questions because we're starting to get a lot. So we have a question from Macmillan about externships, and it's something we're particularly proud of. So I'd love for the Dean to share a little bit with you about some of our externships, internships, clinical opportunities.
I think it's a wonderful way to approach law school and kind of thinking about it as practice to practice. So you're practicing in law school to get ready for practice when you graduate from law school. Last year, Stetson had over 450 different experiential opportunities. We had more opportunities for students than we had students to be able to fill them. So the result is that we think that part of the educational process exists not only in the classroom, but what happens outside of the classroom, whether it's through any one of our 37 different clinical and externship opportunities with over 60 hosting organizations. So we have opportunities for students to participate in the state's attorney's office and the public defender's office, where they get the opportunity to stand up in court and say, the equivalent of Chris Petroskevich, Department of Justice, on behalf of the United States, with a supervisor that's right next to your right-hand shoulder that says, everything's okay, you're doing just fine. Also doing that in the context of a professionalism class, that recognizing that being a lawyer is not just about advocating on behalf of your client, but advocating on behalf of your client with professionalism. And there are a number of other externship programs that exist outside of appearing in court on behalf of clients, working on a number of cooperative organizations like Gulf Coast Legal Services that provide a wide variety and a wide gamut of different substantive areas in which our students tend to participate.
I have students talk to me all the time about their favorite part of school is the externship or clinic that they participated in, and some of them do more than one, and it's really fun and it's a good educational experience. We actually have a great question about our part-time program. For those of you who don't know, Stetson offers both a full-time day and a part-time evening program, and it's a great way for those of you who are kind of concerned about quitting your job and going to school full-time. The part-time program is a very, very good program, and the actual question is about the faculty and the opportunities for the part-time program and the differences. Dean, would you like to talk just for a minute or so about the part-time program and our faculty and courses?
Sure. So our part-time program is really an integrated part of our entire law school experience. The faculty that teaches in the full-time day program is the same faculty that teaches in our part-time evening program. We have two campuses, one in Gulfport, which is a small part of St. Petersburg, Florida, just across the bay from Tampa Bay. We also have a campus in Tampa, about 30 miles from our Gulfport campus. And our students have the opportunity to take classes in both places. In large parts, our part-time students tend to come from the working environment that exists within Tampa, and so we have a number of students that take classes in both campuses. But our faculty, about 50 faculty members, are all resident in our Gulfport campus. But they also teach both courses in our full-time program and our part-time program in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. So there's no difference between either the part-time program or the full-time program. I also want to say a little bit about our part-time program. My LLM is from Georgetown University and was done as part of a part-time program. And so I completely understand the demands on the time of people that are working a full-time job and yet committed to law school and being able to graduate in 3 or 4 years, and recognizing that non-traditional students add so much to our educational environment. The perspectives that they provide in classes are very, very different than the perspectives of other students. And so we actively look for those non-traditional students as part of our admissions process. I'd like to think that we, as faculty members and administrators and staff of the College of Law, do a great job about educating tomorrow's lawyers. But I also want to think and also know from having stood up in classes for 12 years that many of our students learn so much more from each other than they will ever learn from us, and the perspectives that each of the students have and the diversity of that student body is so significant in making Stetson what Stetson is.
We had a pretty timely question, and it's from DF Austin, and it's about our bar passage rate. And ironically, It's happening right now, the February bar. So, Dean, I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit about the programs and services and what we do to make sure our students go into their bar examination prepared.
So our academic support community is one that exists on the College of Law campus. We have 3 dedicated full-time professionals that are there to help with students with academic success. So part of academic success is bar preparation, but part of academic success is making sure that the students have the ability and the skills to be able to, interviewing skills and client skills to be able to be successful in the practice of law. The bar passage rate, we recognize, is not the only thing that law schools do, but recognizing that a big part of our responsibility is to help people be able to prepare for the bar. After all, they came to law school to be able to become lawyers, and a big part of that is being successful in the bar examination. So the bar exam in Florida is 2 days. It's today and tomorrow, and I'm delighted to be able to go over there and have lunch with our students tomorrow to encourage them that they can do anything for 3 more hours. So very, very excited about that. And Stetson, I think, has been enormously successful in helping its students be prepared for the bar exam. Its bar passage rate last year was about 90%. Which is the highest of all of the law schools in Florida. So it's something that we take very, very seriously. Our bar passage rate over the last 3 administrations have been between 88% and 91%. We're very, very excited about the bar passage rate. We're excited to be first in our class in terms of bar passage rate, but also recognize the responsibility for those students that didn't pass the bar exam. And so we have redoubled our efforts for those students that didn't make it the first time to make sure that they have the ticket that they need to be able to practice law. And that's the first part of it, is passing the bar exam.
That's right. We have a couple of other alumni graduate related questions, and this one is from Law Tony, and it says, what sort of jobs do most graduates decide to go into? Public sector, private sector, law firms, and government. And I think this one's a really fun one. We see students going into all kinds of areas, but we have a lot of students who actually want to go into public service work, and with the public service loan forgiveness program, it's actually a really great idea. Dean, would you like to comment a little bit about some of the types of jobs and maybe some of the really interesting firms or agencies that recruit our students?
Absolutely. I'm very happy about where we have been in terms of the job placement of our students after graduation. There is a combination of students that work in the private sector, mostly in law firms, not surprisingly, although that number is shrinking nationally. And so you're seeing usually between 60 and 65% of the students tend to work in traditional law firms. And a significant portion work for governmental agencies. A significant portion are involved in public interest. And so it's a wide variety of employment options that I think exist after law school. And utilizing a law degree is not what most people have thought about it forever, which is that you go to law school, you go and work for a law firm. I think the trend nationally, and Stetson is certainly included, is that there are alternative careers. I think often about a conversation that I have with one of our most famous alums, who is Rich McKay, who's the president and CEO of the Atlanta Falcons. And he is not a lawyer by trade, but my conversation with him, and when he was on campus talking with students, he said, I use the legal training that I had at Stetson every day. It doesn't mean that I'm writing a contract. It doesn't mean that I'm negotiating a contract. It doesn't mean that I'm closing a property deal. But the critical thinking skills that are necessary to be successful in law school are those same type of skills that professionals use for success in whatever field that they're involved in, whether it's business or whether it's running an NFL team. So I think that there is a wide variety of areas that our students tend to use after they graduate law school, and the traditional law firm seems to be just one of them.
We actually have a lot of students who come to law school and aren't sure if they want to be advocates and think about transactional work. Can students who graduate from Stetson, and this is actually to address one of the questions that came up, but can students who graduate from Stetson look and gain careers outside of the trial advocacy arena, and what types of opportunities might they have? I'm thinking more transactional work, wills, trust. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is business planning and the relationship that exists between clients and their lawyers. I spent a number of years litigating cases for the Justice Department. My title was trial attorney. I had a group of cases, and my job was to figure out the result in many of them and to try them. Except I spent about 90% of my time not in the courtroom. I spent most of my time litigating on paper, through briefs and otherwise. But even if you're outside, if you're in the litigation arena, the transactional pieces take place because you typically file motions and things with the court, and the result is that the court tends to make decisions that don't necessarily require you to stand up in court. There is a whole other area of law that doesn't even look at the litigation aspect of the practice of law. And that's business planning, it's mergers and acquisitions, it's contracts. Typically in law firms, they have a section in a law firm that does litigation. And then every other section tends to do transactional type work. So whether it's bankruptcy work, whether it's negotiating with regulatory agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Health and Human Services, all of those different areas are those areas that our students tend to be involved in that don't necessarily require them to stand up in court. And a big part of the practice of law is helping clients solve real-world problems. And the way that you do that, in large part, is you try to do that by avoiding going to court.
Right.
You try to do that through negotiating with the regulatory agencies and providing sound advice to your clients.
I think that's important for the folks watching today is you have opportunities to get your hands into all kinds of pots. And I just always like people to know that you're going to learn a lot of different skill sets at Stetson. And part of the skill sets, of course, will be advocacy, research, writing, but you'll learn a lot more than that. And we actually have a question about our graduates and where they go, where they practice. And I know just from being here for a while and from the data our Career Development Office has provided, we have, of course, the largest concentration in the state of Florida. But outside of Florida, Georgia's probably one of our biggest areas. New York, Virginia, D.C. area, also Pennsylvania, Delaware, California, and Texas. These particular states have a good concentration of alumni. But I think we have alumni in 40-some states and several different countries. In fact, we have someone in two people in Switzerland, one with the International Hockey Federation and one with the Ramsar Secretariat. So who knew we would have such a good representation in Switzerland? So Dean, when you're talking with our students who are looking to go outside of state, what kind of advice do you recommend or do you offer them as they're looking at jobs and building their network?
I think building the network begins as soon as you get to law school. A lot of the relationships that you tend to generate in law school are with our career services office and with our faculty. So we have a faculty that has most people refer to as an open door policy. I'm not quite sure that we even have a policy that talks about something like that, because that's the assumption that we have at the College of Law. And so a big part of the building the relationships to go to Atlanta, to go to Pennsylvania, to go to New York State, is developing those relationships while you're still in law school. The worst advice I think I could give would be wait until the second semester of your third year and then think about a job.
No.
In fact, my orientation advice to students last year was make the career service offices one of the stops that you have so quickly. They're there because they provide an enormous amount of resources for our students and have contacts with the various people in the various geographic areas of the United States and beyond. And so utilizing our career services office as well as our faculty. So in many cases, the pathway to becoming a law professor is that you clerk after law school, you have an LLM, and then you become a law professor. The model at Stetson is a little bit different than that. The average length of time that our professors have practiced law on our faculty is between 7 and 10 years. And so they practice law someplace and have contacts in many of those areas. I practice law in Washington, D.C. A number of our faculty members practice law in New York and in Florida and California. And utilizing those contacts that we had to be able to make the connections to do internships in the summer, to do an internship during the fall semester of your second year, are those types of relationships that we tend to build on to create the kind of successes that we want after graduation. So I don't think that there's a magic time in which we kind of turn on and off the networking opportunities. That's looking for a job is one that begins when you first start thinking about law school. And so people ask me often, what should I do to prepare for law school? I've got two pieces of advice. One is to read, and read often, because law school is about being able to take various cases in different areas, be able to synthesize them that are not exactly the same set of facts that you have, and coming up with a result. And the way that you do that is you tend to read cases, and you read lots of cases to be able to do that. The other one is to start to make the contacts, those people in your communities that you want to be able to rely on after your first year, after your second year, after your third year, because the earlier that they know you in the process, the easier it is when the job market comes around after your third year.
Thanks, Dean. We actually have a question from Jose. Jose, I'm so pleased that you logged in and asked about being a member of our Foreign Attorney Accelerated JD program. I'd love to talk with you offline. In fact, I'm going to ask if our wonderful colleague Darren would be so kind as to type my email address down for you. Jose, I'd love to talk with you. Please email me. We'll set up a time to talk, and I can walk you through the whole admission process, credentialing process, and how everything works for our foreign educated attorneys. We have a question that I think is a really good question. I'm excited to talk about it. How might Stetson better prepare me than any other law school for a career in law or law instruction? What makes a Stetson education special? What is distinct about it?
Well, I love that question.
Yes, I do too.
I'm very excited about that because I think the idea of deciding where you want to go to law school is such a big decision. There are 204 choices that exist in the United States, and the last thing that we would want you to do is come to Stetson for the wrong reasons. And so the areas I think that make us distinctive, that help us stand out, is about the value and values that I think of a law school education. So I talked about two of the areas in which I think Stetson is most widely known. It's our advocacy program and our legal writing program. I'm going to digress for a second and tell you a little story about I was doing an alumni event in Naples last week, and during the alumni event, I had a student come up to me and say, "Hey, can I tell you about my day?" And of course, my answer is, "Well, of course, certainly you can tell me about your day." And she said, "It's the first time that I appeared in court was today." And after I finished, the judge asked me to come back to chambers. And after she came back to chambers, the judge asked her, "I haven't seen you in my courtroom before. When did you pass the bar?" And she said, "Well, I just passed the bar." And he said, "Well, how many times have you appeared in court?" And she said, "Well, this is my first time." And he kind of nodded and smiled and said, "Well, you must be a Stetson lawyer." I think a part of that is not only about the first experience that you have out of law school, but it's the experiences that you have throughout your career. And one of the ways that I think makes Stetson distinctive is that we help you prepare for practice much sooner in your career with our advocacy program and with our legal research and writing program. Both of those are the areas that I think help Stetson lawyers stand out most immediately. I think the other areas of influence that Stetson has are fantastic elder law program, and Professor Becky Morgan, who is the national leader in elder law, and the influence that we have on a population in Florida that very much needs the work of our faculty and work of our students, along with our Veterans Institute. So our Veterans Institute helps to streamline the benefit process for our veterans. And our Associate Dean Mike Allen has testified before Congress on a number of occasions about various veterans issues. And we're the only place in the country that creates a database for our deployed veterans, our deployed military. So if someone has a family law issue in Sacramento, California, we can match them with a family law lawyer in Sacramento, California. And if they have a foreclosure issue in Chicago, we can match them with a foreclosure attorney who's agreed to take it on a pro bono basis in Chicago. And so there are lots of ways that I think Stetson becomes distinctive. Those are 4 kind of spheres of influence that I think Stetson has. And then you combine that with the genuine interest in values. And when I'm talking about values, I'm talking about the community service that our students provide. Over 30,000 hours of community service last year. Just think about the impact that that has on the lives of so many people in the Tampa Bay community and beyond. We have a privilege, and I include myself in that category because I'm very proud that I became a lawyer. But I think that what goes along with the privilege is the responsibility that exists when we become lawyers and the ability to make our communities that much better. And so Stetson, I think, is distinctive because of its culture of community, but also I think it's embracing of the community, both our local community, our regional community, and a much broader community, to uphold the rule of law, but also to have an impact on society as both lawyers in our communities and also leaders in our communities.
And I think that actually addresses the question we had from, I think it's Eliezer Lomel, what is special about the character and ambiance of our school? And I think the dean touched on that naturally when talking about the value we have on service, the importance teaching and mentoring for our faculty to students. I would just chime in and say it's a very warm and collegial environment. Students don't have the mindset of stepping on each other to get to the top. They build up their classmates and they help each other, and that's something that is very powerful here.
One of the interesting ways I think to describe that is we have about 850 students that exist on our campus, and because we're in a residential community in St. Petersburg, students tend to be involved in the intellectual life together, but tend to be involved in so much more than the intellectual life together, whether it's participating in Habitat for Humanity or participating in a softball team. And so it's a part of it, I think, is the actual setup of the campus. We have between 15 and 20% of our students are, in effect, Stetson residents. We have dorm rooms that exist on campus. We have all of the houses that surround our campus. Every house that's contiguous to campus is owned by Stetson, and an apartment complex that's 2 blocks away. So we have a significant group of students that are that live on our campus, as well as a whole group of students that live very close that are in walking distance of our campus. And so it tends to build a sense of community simply because of how we're set up.
And I think the other part to that is a lot of our faculty and staff live in Gulfport and St. Pete. So you see folks at the grocery store or at the mall. We have a question actually about the JAG program and about Stetson attorneys or Stetson graduates and recruitment into JAG. Can you talk about JAG a little bit? And maybe what is JAG and which JAG representations come to campus?
So we have, so JAG is the Judge Advocate General, and each of our military branches has a version of the JAG Corps in which their lawyers represent them in military matters, both as prosecutors and defense lawyers. In fact, we have a number of faculty members that have been JAG officers. The video that you saw a little bit earlier featured Professor Charlie Rose, who is the director of our Center for Excellence in Advocacy, who was an Army Judge Advocate. Rachel Van Landingham, who is a visiting assistant professor with us here at Stetson, was also a part of the Judge Advocates Corps. And so that has been a very strong connection for us. We also have MacDill Air Force Base that exists in the Tampa community, which is not your typical Air Force base. It also has Central Command, as well as some of the elite SEAL units, SEAL type units that exist are all based at MacDill Air Force Base. And so the result is that we have such a close connection with our colleagues at MacDill Air Force Base, and particularly in light of our Veterans Institute. A big part of the connection that we have is through our JAG program.
JAG is a pretty amazing program. I actually wanted to ask the dean to talk a little bit about our class sizes. One of the most frequently asked questions I get is, besides the 1L classes, what do electives look like? And what's this thing Stetson has called tethered advocacy evidence? What is that about? Can you talk a little bit about class sizes for 1L electives and tethering?
Sure. So the class sizes for 1Ls tend to be about 70 per section or so. Our legal research and writing classes are much, much smaller, so they tend to be in the 20 to 25 to 30 range. And then the upper level courses all tend to be much, much smaller than that. I'm teaching a tax policy course this semester that has less than 10 students in it. And so the result is that you have so much more of an interaction that exists with our students and faculty, particularly in some of the upper levels.
I actually find it interesting if you think about the one-on-one attention you get from a law faculty member in a class of under 10 or fewer than 10 is pretty powerful. And I can't imagine the type of discussion that goes on and the ability to really dialogue and go deeper into the subject matter. We frequently get a question as well about alumni and judges, and are we interacting with our alumni and the judges in the community on a regular basis, or have our alumni scattered? And I always say, of course we interact. We're, Stetson, we're the oldest law school in the state. Our dean's been here a little over 18 months, and I'd love to hear his perspective on the Stetson alumni base and judicial community in the Tampa Bay area.
They are, I think, completely happy with the involvement they've had with the College of Law. I've spent the first 18 months wandering around the state, wandering to Atlanta and to Washington and New York, where we have groups of alumni, and the reception that we get in all of those places is really fantastic. In large part because I think that we combined three things that make Stetson a little bit more distinctive. So I've already talked a little bit about some of the areas of influence. But I think number one is the rigor of the academic program that we take very seriously, preparing lawyers for success in the future. I think it's the relationships that we have, both with our community and with our alumni base. And then the third part is the responsibility that we have as lawyers, and it's very recognized in our community that you see Stetson students and Stetson faculty members and Stetson staff members involved in so many different types of community activities. So our alumni base is strong. It's about 9,000, and I've probably done probably close to 30 receptions throughout the various cities since I've been here in 18 months, and the reception has been overwhelming. I look forward to continuing to make those connections because, in large part, that 9,000 strong alumni base are those types of people that are going to help employ our graduates when they graduate from law school, and making sure that they are updated on everything, all the positive things that are happening at the College of Law, I continue to think is so important for our ultimate success. There's no way to measure the success of a law school than through its students. And of course, its students become its alumni. And so we not only think about the process of admitting students, but when we admit a student as part of our class, the expectation is they join those 9,000 people that I think are very proud to say that they're Stetson alums.
I agree. We actually have another question about the part-time program. We touched on 1L class sizes for full-time students, but we didn't really talk about the part-time group. And the part-time students have about 40 to 45 in the entering class, and just like 1Ls, they stay in the same section. And we didn't get a chance to talk about sections, so I kind of want to talk about how do law students travel throughout their first year of law school, or for part-timers, first year and a half. What is a section, and what does that mean?
Our classes typically are divided into three sections, and so you take all of your first year classes with the same section. Some of those sections may be divided in half, so you may take a civil procedure course with 35 instead of 70 students. The only time that there are difference in the first year is the legal research and writing program, because those classes tend to be divided up a lot more. So because there are 20, 25, or 30 students associated with each legal research and writing section, we tend not to keep them within sections. We tend to pull them from other places. And so you may have a mixing of students in each of the sections that would be part of the legal research and writing program. Part of that is that you create some continuity in the first year. We recognize that there are lots of things on your mind in the first year. And so that's why we have a prescribed curriculum in the first year. It's the foundations for everything that happens in your law school career, but frankly, the foundations that happen in all of legal practice. And so it would be terrible if you left law school and not understood what contracts are, or torts are, or property. And so the result is that we scheduled those all for you in the first year to give you a little bit of a sense of a broad spectrum of the foundations. And then in the second and third year, you have many, many more options about taking some of the courses. Laura, one of your other questions was about tethered evidence. And we teach two different courses, trial advocacy and evidence. And when we tether them, we teach them together. And so for someone who has spent a lot of time in the courtroom, there is evidence and there's trial advocacy, and they almost never work independently of each other. Any time that you're in a courtroom, evidence has such an impact on the flow of the case. And so you may have some information that you want to be able to introduce. The question is whether you can or not. And part of that is using the rules of evidence to be able to do that in a trial situation. And so we have a number of sections of our evidence and trial advocacy class that are taught together, in large part because one of the 26 exceptions to the rule of evidence doesn't mean anything unless you do it in the context of how that plays into the introduction of evidence at a trial, or an exception to the introduction of evidence at a trial. And so we are very committed to teaching evidence both and advocacy as a tethered course, in large part because that's the way that it happens when you graduate from law school. I would never do trial advocacy without evidence, and I would never do evidence without trial advocacy if I were appearing in court.
I think that's just one other way that our Stetson education is a little bit different from some other programs. Jose, you had a great question about the LSAT. Stetson does not actually offer a preparation course for the LSAT, but there are several commercial courses out there. You can check them out or consider studying on your own. You're going to have to figure out what's best for you and how you study and your schedule. Now, Chelsea has a great question about assimilating into the Southern Florida community if you're from out of state. And Chelsea, about 20% of our students come from other states, and I really don't think they have a problem. I mean, I think once you get here, you participate in orientation, you'll get to know your classmates. We do a wonderful reception for family at the beginning of orientation. And I think you're going to find that our community is very warm, very welcoming. If you don't know where the grocery store is, pop into admissions. Carmen or Darren or I will tell you where it is. We'll probably talk your ear off. But Dean came from Louisiana. So what was it like coming from Louisiana to Florida, and how did you find the assimilation process?
Well, so the food wasn't as spicy that exists in Florida as it did in Louisiana. But I think the assimilation was really fantastic. It's such a sense of community that exists. You know, I have been here for 18 months. I haven't heard one student say, I came from another jurisdiction and I came to Florida and I don't feel like I'm included in the entire process. I don't think that's something that even crosses your mind, other than when you're driving here to begin law school. I think there's a complete integration that exists, and geography is not one of those things that I would be concerned about at all.
Yeah, I agree. I think our students do a great job of helping each other. We actually have student ambassadors who serve as 1L mentors, and you get assigned your ambassador at orientation, and they're going to help you out. So Law Tony asked about study abroad programs, and we have a whole host of study abroad opportunities. Now, the first part of your question is about, can you do it as a 1L? The soonest you can study abroad will be the summer going into your 2L year. Dean, did you want to talk about some of our exciting opportunities in other countries?
Sure. So the first one I'll talk about is London. We have an Autumn in London program in which students, typically in their second year, spend autumn in London. So they spend the entire fall semester of their second year or the fall semester of their third year in our London program. We have a resident director that is a full-time faculty member at the College of Law. as well as professors both from Stetson, as well as both professors from other law schools within the United States and also from abroad. So that is one of the only programs that exists that is a semester-long program. We have one short program that exists in the Cayman Islands between the fall and the spring semester. And then the remainder of our programs are programs that exist in the summer. So we have a program in The Hague, we have a program in China, we have a program in Buenos Aires. And Laura, am I missing any?
Spain, China, Argentina, The Hague. Nope, they're the 4.
Okay, good. So those 4 are the programs. They typically last for 7 or 8 weeks. Students that participate are Stetson students as well as students from other law schools. I had a chance to visit our London program in October of last year. And what a wonderful experience to be able to do that in the heart of London and be able to participate in the various cultural activities that exist in London. As well as be able to share some of your experiences with students that come from other places.
We also have a couple of exchange programs for students who would like to visit elsewhere. We have a semester program in Australia at University of Victoria, I believe. We have a program with the University of Toulouse in France. It's equivalent to a master's degree or LLM in France, and you would do that jointly with our JD. We also have a dual degree program in Spain where you would do, it's called the JD Grado en Derecho, and it's basically 2 years in the US, 2 years in Spain. There are a few other requirements to it, but at the end, you'd be able to work toward your license in both the US and in Spain. So a lot of opportunities to study elsewhere, and we're always happy to tell you about them in more detail. DF Austin, you have a good question about being overwhelmed in your first year, and we hear that a lot. We jokingly call it the first semester freakout. It's usually the time when the students turn in their first memo or they get the ungraded portion back with red pen. But it's true. Students do have a little bit of a feeling of being overwhelmed or unsure of themselves. And so your question really is about retention rate and what is our retention rate from 1L to 2L year, as well as what can students do to prepare them for their first year. So.
I like the idea of the first semester freakout. That's really fabulous. Law school is such a change from an undergraduate education, so I might downplay the freakout part just a little bit, and think about it as kind of a change in how you've approached school from what you did in undergraduate school to what you're doing in law school. I'll give you a little bit of a preview of what I tell you during orientation. And that is that there's going to be times when you walk out of torts class and think you were in contracts class. When those things happen, put all your books down and go for a walk or go to the gym. The relationships that you have with your family and friends are going to be the ones that are going to be able to help you through some of those tough times during the first semester of law school. I think the other part is that we also understand that this is a major transition, and so we have the infrastructure in place to be able to help. Just because you're coming to law school doesn't mean that you should stop going to the movies. If you like movies, Friday night ought to be movie night. If you like to cook, Thursday night ought to be the night that you cook a 6-course dinner. But think about it in terms of law school is the chance to be able to fulfill something that you want to do professionally. And we recognize that there are 225 students this year that went through the first year in the first semester, and the previous year a cohort of students also did the same thing. We recognize that there are times where it becomes a lot more stressful, and that's when you rely on the community infrastructure that exists. One of the nice parts about orientation is you're going to get such an opportunity to meet so many different people who are all going to be thinking about the same types of things that you're going to think about. And the key is to be able to rely on others to be able to help you through some of those, whether it's our faculty, whether it's our staff, whether it's fellow students, or whether it's mom and dad or your brother and sister. All of those, I think, play a role in helping you make the transition between undergraduate school or professional life in law school. I jokingly said a little bit earlier, how do you get ready for law school is to sit down and read. You don't need to read contracts books or civil procedure books. Please don't do that. Enjoy your summer. But a way that you can enjoy your summer to help you prepare for law school is to pick up a novel and read it. In large part, one of the major transitions that exists in law school is sitting down and reading and understanding cases for 5 or 6 courses that you're taking at the same time. And one of the biggest transitions is being able to do that for an extended period of time. So one of the best ways to prepare yourself is find something that you like this summer and read it.
That's actually an excellent segue into Chelsea's question. She is asking us about classroom assessments. One exam for the entire grade, midterms, graded midterms, papers, as well as the overall Stetson grading system. Could you address that for us, Dean?
Sure. So traditionally law school, so some of you can rent the paper chase. In which John Hausman is Professor Kingsfield. He's the contracts professor, and the grade is determined by one exam at the end of the semester. That tends not to be how Stetson operates. We have multiple ways of assessing students. Not surprisingly, a part of that is through final exam preparation, but a part of it is also throughout the semester through midterm exams or multiple midterm exams. So there are many ways that our faculty assess students that are not just based simply on a final examination. I think, for example, Professor Finch does a wonderful job in the first year he teaches civil procedure of doing multiple assessments. I had a wonderful conversation in my office with him one day when we were talking about how he assesses students. And it's so refreshing to see that someone who's been on our faculty for over 30 years is constantly thinking about better ways to be able to communicate information and better ways to provide feedback to students. So it's not just about the assessment, it's also about the feedback that goes along with the assessment that I think is in big part the key to the success of the first year of law school, to the second semester of law school, to your second and third year. All of those are foundation building blocks for you to be able to successfully practice law. And we recognize that the more feedback that we provide you gives you that much more in terms of your ability to understand where are the areas where you need some additional improvement.
And I think we actually missed the retention question that was asked earlier. So as we talk about our grading system and the grade normalization, perhaps we can also address retention. We actually don't lose very many students at Stetson. I think that's one of the things we're pretty proud of. So.
It's not something that I think you ought to be particularly worried about. It's something that is a rigorous academic experience. But the people that we tend to lose after the first year of law school tend to be the people that say, I don't think law school is for me.
That's true.
So the result, I think, is a little bit different and a little misleading to take a look at numbers and say, well, that was all based on involuntary attrition. In many cases, students decided that either the timing of what's going on in their personal circumstances or the study of law is just not for them. And so that's not something in which Stetson has a significant consideration or a significant worry about attrition after the first year.
And that leads us to then the grading system and the curve. Everyone hears of the infamous curve. What is that all about in law school?
It's a way that law schools are able to regularize what happens across sections. So if Stetson has 3 sections in your first year, there ought to be some parity that exists between sections, and our grade normalization policy tends to put each of the classes in bands so that there is, in effect, the equal opportunity that exists for students no matter what section that you're a part of. It's one that I think makes a lot of sense, particularly in the first year when you have a group of students all taking the same classes but from different professors. And so the result is that our normalization policy allows faculty members some significant discretion, but within banding issues, or within bands, to allow essentially continuity across the entire first year and the first year courses.
Well, Dean, I think we have a time for one more final question, and this question is actually about salaries and sort of our median salary. And I'm going to ask you to maybe talk a little bit about some of the wonderful things that our career development team does and some of the data we collect, things along those lines.
That's one of the hardest things to be able to answer. There's really no meaningful data that exists about what salary data is going to be like after you graduate from law school. So in large part, our accrediting body, the American Bar Association, collects a lot of employment data. And I think transparency in employment data is extraordinarily well received and is consumer information that students ought to be aware of. All that information is on our website. It's all in one place. It tells you the number of students that graduated last year, the number of students that have been part of a JD required or a JD preferred or a professional position. It tells you all of those things. The difficulty is measuring what salaries look like, because that's not something that is required. And so the sampling that most law schools have that are available, either on their website or through conversations with admissions offices or deans or otherwise, is typically based on a very, very small sample. And so that's one of the areas of caution that I think exists, is what does the starting salary look like? Well, it's going to depend. If you're going to work in public interest, it's going to be a lot lower than if you're going to go and work for a 500-person law firm. And Stetson has such a wide variety of people that go and work for the 500-person law firm, as well as going to work for a 2-person law firm, compared to working for a governmental agency, compared to working for public interest. And so there's such a wide gamut that I don't think that the information that exists is coherent and comprehensive enough to be able to make value judgments about law schools based on starting salaries.
I agree. Well, thank you all so much for spending the hour with us. It's a lot of fun for us to host this event. We hope that you will email us, get in touch with follow-up questions. Dean, thank you for taking time out of your schedule and hanging out with us tonight. I believe our contact information will roll across the screen when we log out. But for now, thank you all so much and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Stetson Law Live. For more information, send us an email or give us a call. For your convenience, our contact information will remain on screen for the next few minutes. Be sure to check our homepage often for news, information, and updates. Thanks again. We look forward to hearing from you soon.